Okay, good evening, class. We have the first of the two PowerPoints for our flipped classroom. So today we're going to be talking about World War I and World War II. We're going to also make sure you take good corner notes. There'll be a quiz at the end. Okay, there's a couple of main causes of World War I. One of the major ones that kind of sets everything in motion is this idea of Balkan nationalism. Now, if you look at the map here, you see the Balkan nations of Serbia, Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Kosovo, and Bosnia-Herzegovina and Croatia. What really starts World War I off is the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist, and that kind of sets off the events that leads up into World War I. And what is going on is that these Balkan nations want to be independent. And so they're not only are they fighting against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they're also fighting against the Ottoman Empire for their independence. Okay, the other cause of World War I is these entangled alliances. One of the issues about the international relations at the time was this idea of maintaining balance of power. What that means is that every nation in Europe is trying to make sure that one side does not amass too much power, so they start making alliances with each other in order to keep everything on an even keel. Plus, also, remember that during this time, these are still all monarchies, except for France, which is a republic. So a lot of these monarchies are also wind up marrying each other. So for instance, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, he's actually related to the King of England. So it's I think it's like a fourth or fifth cousin. So, and they try to do that in order, not only are they trying to marry royalty with each other, but the idea of marrying royalty is a way of keeping the peace, but also maintaining the balance of power. But also what's going on in the balance of power is also this idea of that if Great Britain and France make an alliance to stop Germany, but Germany and Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire will make an alliance, then what will happen in what's called the Triple Entente, Great Britain, France, and Russia make an alliance to check the power of Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire as well. And this, even though this is trying to help maintain the peace, it really isn't. It's really actually just making this a larger powder keg, waiting for something to blow, which winds up happening with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, another reason for causes of World War I is militarism, and this goes back in this idea of maintaining that balance of power. And what is really happening is this idea that we're going to make sure that we have one of the larger armies or navies in order to try to check in our enemies of our own nation. And you see this a lot too. This is very, very common during this time of the early 20th century, and part of this is the military thought that is going through Europe at the time. A lot of these leaders of these nations, they've read Captain Mahan's work. Alfred Thayer Mahan was a captain in the United States Navy, and he wrote a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And he basically argued that if you want to be a great nation, you need to have a powerful navy. And this really catches on in Europe, and especially Kaiser Wilhelm II, who is the Emperor of Germany. He reads this book, and so he makes a case for building a very giant fleet, expanding the role of the German Navy. Then also, what Kaiser Wilhelm is also doing, he sees England and France having colonies in Africa. Now the Germans are part of the scramble for Africa too in the late 19th century. But he also wants to be, besides a regional power, wants to be a world power like he sees the British and the French. So you start seeing with new technology and this thought about having to have large militaries, you start seeing this buildup of forces where sooner or later you're going to, if you go to war with somebody, you think you're going to win because your army is larger and you have better technology. Okay, so anyways, World War I kicks off, and at this time, no one uh, is really practicing the defense. Everything's about the offense, and if you're going to win a battle, not only do you need new technology, but you need guts. You need fighting spirit. Well, what winds up happening is that in the early 20th century, we have all these brand new technology, military technology, like the machine gun. So, um, you know, when you're trying to like run across a field, the machine gun is cutting people down, by the hundreds. So the attack kind of stops. Um, and then even at the beginning of World War I, you still have cavalry is still making these cavalry attacks, and then find out that it doesn't work. And that what winds up happening is that within the 6 months, World War I just basically becomes a trench warfare. Now you're digging trenches, and everyone's not attacking anymore. They're all in the defense. So then they go on the offensive in order to try to take the enemy's trenches, and that doesn't work because the machine gun cuts them down. And then you start seeing the first use of chemical weapons on a large scale, like for instance poison gas, mustard gas, and lucite, which is considered a choking agent, and what it does, it burns the lungs. And that doesn't break the stalemate of World War I and the trench warfare. The British come up with the idea of tanks. The first tanks are used. That doesn't work because the tanks break down a lot. They're not fast enough. Then you have airplanes, either dropping small bombs or airplanes are fighting each other in the air, called dogfighting. What happens is this idea of trench war, the no man land. You have two trenches, then you have like this area that no one controls, and this is where the attacks take place, and then people get killed in no man's land. And what causes these devastating casualties, not only the machine gun, but also the artillery. Artillery is a lot larger now, and they're more powerful, and the cannons can shoot farther. And they try to do everything from what's called a rolling barrage, where they'll go ahead and bombard someone for 8 hours, and then they're going to start sending artillery in front of the advancing soldiers, but it doesn't work. Then you also have disease and influenza. So you have people catching the flu and dying. We're also having something called trench foot because the trenches were always wet and it was cold. And what happens when you're standing in water for a long time, your skin starts to peel away and fall off. And this is during the time when we don't have any modern antibiotics as well. So it is very difficult. So pretty much for about 4 years, the Central Powers, which is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and then the Ottoman Empire, because they joined World War I on the Germany side, and the Allies, which is Italy, Russia, France, and Great Britain, they're pretty much at a standstill. No one, and if anyone's making any sort of gains, it's only by maybe a mile or so, if that. What really actually changes the nature of the war on the side of the Allies is that the United States joins. And when the United States joins, you have 1 million new reinforcements, and the Germans can't handle that, basically. So the Americans come in. Basically, the Germans launch one last offensive. They can't do it, and they asked for peace. They asked to start peace talks, and then we start seeing the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so here's the effects of the Treaty of Versailles. Versailles is where the peace treaty was signed, which was in Versailles, France. Basically, it does a couple of things. It establishes the League of Nations, which is basically was a body that would come together and you guys would talk countries would talk and try to find solutions to problems without having to go to war. The League of Nations doesn't really work, and it winds up disbanding about 20 years later, just before the outbreak of World War II. Germany is forced to pay reparations, which means reparations are basically Germany has to take responsibility for starting World War I, and they have to pay the winners. Basically, they have to pay Britain, France, Italy, and the United States. Then you also have what's called the mandate system by the British and the French. And basically, the Ottoman Empire is broken up, and basically the Ottoman Empire is actually broken up and is given to um, because of the League of Nations and because the British and the French won the war, they're able to get Iraq to the British, and Syria goes to the French, Lebanon goes to the French, Palestine, which is now the modern state of Israel, goes to the British, the Transjordan area goes to the British, and then Saudi Arabia it becomes independent in 1932. So, there's an old saying, the victor goes to spoils, and the British and the French were victors in World War I, so they got to go ahead and cut up the spoils. Also, what happens is that Germany is pretty much they got very, very harsh sanctions against them. They could not have an army larger than 100,000. They could not have any more battleships. Their navy was reduced. They could not have an air force, and this really and they had to get rid of their Kaiser. They had to get rid of their leader. They could not have a monarchy, so they had to go become a republic. In the idea that this was because Germany was too dangerous, and that by putting these restrictions on Germany, peace would break out. Well, that doesn't happen. Okay, we see that about 20 years later, World War II starts with Germany invading Poland. Okay, so another result of World War I was the end of the empire. The Habsburg dynasty, which ruled the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were done. The Romanovs that ruled Russia, there was a Russian Revolution. The communists took over and murdered the Russian royal family. And then obviously the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East wound up having to be broken up as well. So that was another result of World War I was the end of all the empires, except for the British Empire, obviously. Britain is the only one that actually really had an empire still. You could argue the French had an empire too, which they did, even though technically the French were not French is not a monarchy; it's a republic, but they also had an empire as well. So basically the only empire that really left that was could be based on monarchies was the British Empire. Okay, so the Russian Revolution. So Russia enters World War One on the side of the Allies, and about 2 years later, they pull out because the war is going horrible for the Russians. They're losing men uh, at a very quick rate. Um, the czars in Russia were pretty much absolute autocrats. They had almost absolute power, and um, that created conditions for a revolution, as well as not winning. The war is very unpopular because the Russians are not winning, and a man named Vladimir Lenin winds up taking over and overthrowing the Tsar, making a peace treaty with Germany, and getting out of the war. And then you start having and then Russia goes from being a monarchy to communism, and then eventually becomes a communist totalitarian state for the next 70 years. All right, so in the intervening years, things aren't going well for the Germans. They have a republic, but it's not working out, and there are about 30 political parties in Germany, um, and they're all trying to vie for power. But the German economy is not working. And then what happens during the Great Depression here in the United States in 1929, it soon affects the rest of the world. And it's very, very bad in Germany. So what winds up happening is that Hitler winds up taking over the Nazi Party. Okay, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazis. Okay, now he's not a socialist, right? This is something that people will argue a lot, but Nazis are not socialist. Um, yes, you had some people in the Nazi Party that might have had socialistic principles, um, but they were pretty soon forced out, and or silenced or ignored. And basically, what Adolf Hitler is, he's what we consider a fascist. I mean, he wants what we consider right wing. Yes, he does not want to abolish private property or have the government control industry. He just wants people just to get in line with this idea of extreme nationalism, and he'll use force to do it. So he winds up becoming Chancellor of Germany, and he's not voted in. Okay, the German Constitution under the Weimar Republic was that you have the president as the head of state, and you have the chancellor, sort of like the head of government. And people elected the chancellor. Excuse me, people elected the president. And the president at the time was President Hindenburg. He was a field marshal in World War I, very, very respected general, member of the nobility. So, and then his chancellor at the time was a man named Franz von Papen, and he's very unpopular. And the Nazis are getting seats in the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, and is doing pretty well. And there's a lot of unrest, not only economic but also social unrest with with the communists and other socialists. So Franz von Papen basically says, "Listen, I'll because Franz von Papen wanted to get no confidence vote, so he had to step down. He basically went to his friend Hindenburg and said, "Listen, put this guy Hitler in charge. I'll be the vice chancellor. He'll be the chancellor, and we'll be able to control him because he apparently has the support of the people." And well, he gets appointed chancellor, and things are going okay. A little bit kind of control, but not a lot. Because you're not going to control Adolf Hitler because he already has a plan. And then about 3 months later, there's a fire in the Reichstag, which is the German Parliament building, and he's able to have able to get emergency powers. And under the Constitution, he ruled by special decree. And he wound up suppressing the communists because basically the Reichstag fire was blamed on the communists. So he wound up banning the Communist Party and some of the Socialist Party and starts eliminating political opponents. Hindenburg is actually 80 some odd years old. He's very impressed with what Hitler was doing, even though he didn't like him at first. But he's very impressed with what Hitler was doing. And then he basically wanted Hitler to succeed him. And at this time, the Nazi Party already has a majority in the Reichstag. Hindenburg dies. The German Reichstag basically combines the power of the presidency and chancellor into one, and therefore Hitler then becomes the de facto dictator of Germany. And in the PowerPoint it says the Führer. Führer actually means leader. Okay, now the PowerPoint says guide of Germany, but it's really the leader of Germany, is what it really means. And then he's talking about here of the Third Reich, and it means the Third Empire. Reich actually is German for empire. All right, so he comes in power, and then in 1939 you have the beginning of World War II. Okay, so the Holocaust, which is the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and other undesirables in Europe. Okay, it is genocide, which is genocide is really the killing of a race of people. Now, Hitler's hatred for the Jews comes out of World War I. There's this thing called stabbed in the back theory, that Germany was stabbed in the back. The reason they lost World War I because they were stabbed in the back by the Jews and the communists. And this is really what the average soldier in World War I thought, as well as the average citizen in Germany. But the truth is that when they basically, the German generals basically told the Kaiser at the end of World War I, we only have enough for one major offensive, and that was it. They logistically they were done. They could not really supply any more war material to fight the war. So what winds up happening, they do, and I said before at the beginning of the slide, uh, Germany did the offense, it didn't get anywhere, and they asked for a peace conference. Now here's the thing, while it was going on this, Germany still held a lot of French territory. Okay, it is still trench warfare. They still had a lot of territory that they held, and as the peace talks were going on. So it is not saying that is right, but it is this idea, because German generals and the government never told the German people really that, listen, we're done. Okay, um, so to the average soldier in the trench right there, well, why did we surrender? I mean, we have this territory still. Maybe we could have got a better deal for Germany. But really, the German position was very weak. Okay, if the Americans, along with the British and the French, wanted to push an offensive, the Germans would have got pushed back into Germany. So, but Hitler, he's actually recuperating in a hospital at the end of World War I, because he actually does serve in World War I, and he gets pushed back, and he's in this hospital. He's recovering from a gas attack, and he basically hears about Germany's basically surrender, basically, and that the Germany is going to have to abide by the Treaty of Versailles, and he's devastated. So part of this Nazi campaign is this idea that Germany is made weak by the Jews and the communists, and they need to be purged not only out of Germany, first out of Germany, then out of Europe as well. Okay, and then this is the idea where you start getting into the Aryan race and like this racial supremacy, if you will, of these Aryan blood, Nordic features, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall in stature. So, at first, the Jews were sent and communists were sent to concentration camps, which was just giant prison camps, tortured maybe, or maybe stayed there for a long time, then let out. The Jews could have left Germany, but they had to pay a large tax. And then it went from, and obviously the concentration camp, a lot of them did die in there because they weren't fed and they were tortured, obviously. But it was not a systematic killing. That came later in late 42. This idea of called the final solution. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and kill every single Jew and other undesirable we can out of Europe. So about 3 million Polish Jews died in the Holocaust. A lot of German Jews died in the Holocaust, along with gypsies, homosexuals, communists. Jehovah's Witnesses were targeted as well, especially in Germany. So, and even Lutherans and Catholics were also sent to the death camps and concentration camps as well. These were people who spoke out against Hitler and the Nazis. Okay, so, and Slavs as well, because the Slavs were not considered, they're Eastern European. They were considered racially inferior, if you will. One reason why Hitler attacks Russia in World War II is to take that land for Germany. And obviously he's going to get rid of anyone who's standing on that land. So, all right. So we got to understand the Holocaust was the murder of 6 million Jews because they were racially inferior, and this is in part due to this idea of being stabbed in the back. So Germany has to eliminate them in order to be strong. Okay, so the Yalta Conference, this is where President Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, and Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, met in February 1945 at Yalta to discuss plans of dividing up Europe after the defeat of Germany. So the idea is same thing. Victor goes to spoil, and they're going to make sure that there is no more of this German militarism, and so they're going to basically go to occupy the country. And if you notice here on the map there, is Germany is divided up between the Soviet Union in the east, and then the United States, Great Britain, and France in the west. Okay, and this kind of sets up this idea of the Cold War. This is so at the end of World War II. There's peace for probably about, well, there's been peace since the end of 1945, but we were allies with the Russians for maybe about, everything was going okay for about 2 more years, and then about 1947, 1947, we start the beginning of what is known as a Cold War, which will be discussed at the next slide. All right, and the slide after, I mean not next slide, but the next PowerPoint presentation. So next slide we're gonna have a quiz, so make sure you take the quiz, and see you in class. We'll discuss this in class. You guys have been great. Thanks.